Dobrý den, já jsem Michael Rozsypal a vítám vás u pořadu Progress Your Mind. Mým dnešním hostem je britský velvyslanec v Česku Matthew. Většinu svého dospělého života jsem prožil jinde než ve Velké Británii, říká. Vystudoval religionistiku, japonská studia nebo obchodní administrativu, přes 20 let je v diplomacii. Působil jako velvyslanec v Bosně a Hercegovině, teď je britským velvyslancem v České republice. A proslavil se sloganem Jsem tu novej. Vtipnou komunikací na sociálních sítích. Na Twitteru ho sleduje přes 60 000 lidí. Velvyslanec Matthew je mým hostem. Dobrý den, I'm glad we could be here at your embassy.
Dobrý den, díky za pozvání.
A ještě doplním, že jeden z důvodů, proč tady dnes spolu sedíme, je společná podpora skupiny Progressus a britského velvyslanectví u mezinárodní ceny vévody z Edinburghu. Your Excellency, I'm going to switch to English.
Thank you.
And I've been always interested. Could you explain to me why in the UK, in bathrooms, you have two water taps? One for cold water and one for hot water?
Oh, that's a tough one. Okay, that's a good start. Actually, I can tell you a little bit about it if you really are interested, because it is something people find very strange, and it's not every bathroom, but lots of them still do. So my father was a plumber.
Great.
So I know part of the answer to this, which is that in the past it was two different sources of water and they had to be kept separate because the system was not able to cope with a combination. Of course, this means that you end up with one hand is cold, one hand is hot. So these days you get a mix, but there is a history to it, but it doesn't make much sense now, I agree.
I must say I love the UK, but that always bothers me when I'm in the UK. Do you have something that surprised you or maybe bothers you in the Czech Republic?
Not so far.
Something like that, small detail, in practical life?
Sure. So it's very hard to think of it. I mean, of course, learning Czech and some of the frustrations that go with learning Czech. I mean, this is not a language for beginners, really. It's a tough one, but I think there's been a few frustrations, but generally that's been a good experience. I think probably Czech would be my biggest obstacle so far.
And something in practical life, living in Prague or, traveling around the country?
Sure. So I think I know I'm beginning to settle into Prague and feel like a local when I get annoyed with tourists. There's a lot of them around and sometimes it makes it difficult to move around the city. So maybe that's a sign that I've settled in. But generally we're very happy here as a family and as an individual. I feel very lucky. So it's mostly good. That's one frustration.
You've said you spent more time in your adult life living and staying abroad than in your own country, in the UK. Would you say that you still know your own country?
That's a great question. I think it's part of the challenge of being a diplomat is that you're meant to represent a country that you actually might not spend that much time in. I have been in the UK several parts of my career. I've worked in our foreign ministry in London. I've worked on issues like Middle East peace process or on South America relations from the London end. It still feels like home, but it's true that I haven't spent that much time there recently. And for that reason, I try to go back regularly. I try to follow what's happening in the UK. I try to watch British TV as well. But sometimes I do feel a little bit of a foreigner at home as well.
Are you still in touch with people in the UK? Or do you still have the feel that you are understanding what is going on in your country?
Yeah, so I mean, clearly friends and family, a lot of people that, especially in this career, when you spend so much time overseas, you have to make that effort. You have to travel back and you have to keep in touch with people. So there's plenty of Skype or Zoom calls with my parents, with the kids' grandparents. So we have to do that. But it's also about trying to follow and understand, especially what frankly my boss wants me to do. So my boss, the Foreign Secretary at the moment, is Lord David Cameron. I have to understand what his priorities are because it's my job to represent him and the rest of government. So I have to keep in touch.
You and I spoke last time almost a year ago when you were still new here and your famous hashtag and slogan Jsem tu novej was very famous. After a year, do people recognize you on street?
So it does happen. I mean, I think I don't look typically Czech, so it's probably a little easier to recognize me. But I think it says more, particularly about how successful that campaign, that hashtag was. It says very much about the Czech attitude towards the UK. So I think we have a huge advantage, which is that Czech people like the UK. They appreciate the history that we have together. They watch British TV shows. They follow developments in the UK. So we have a bit of a head start. Of course, we have sporting connections. We have all kinds of history together. And that means you have an advantage when it comes to starting to build the position as a new ambassador here. So, also my predecessor Nick and his predecessor Jan, they both did a great job establishing profile for the embassy. So I'm really trying to take advantage of that head start that they've given me.
Your PR team won a prize for that campaign and for this slogan. Would you say that you are a kind of celebrity?
I wouldn't say celebrity. I think my job is, I've said it a few times, but ambassadors are the original influencers. So our job is to influence. Our job is to be visible and present in the country that we're appointed to. So it's part of my job to be visible and public, but it's not the main part of my job. And so, of course, it's the most visible bit. It's maybe only 10, 15% of what I spend my time on, but it's the part that people most often see. So that sort of recognition, not just of me personally, but what the embassy is doing, is an important part of the job.
Is it easier, thanks to social networks, to be an influencer?
Yeah, so I think social media is another tool. So diplomats, ambassadors have always worked through the media, traditional media. Whatever the new technology is, we have to adapt to that. At times that's been radio, or it's been television, or now we have social media. But it's really about the fundamental job that stays the same. So these are new tools, new ways of doing the same job. What is different about social media, and I see this certainly here in the Czech Republic, is that social media allows you to have a two-way communication. So it's not just project, but you can actually hear back from people. That's the social bit of social media. So if I ask a question about what Czech films I should watch, or which parts of the country I should go and visit, people are able to give me feedback and tell me where, what they think I should be watching, listening to, reading.
I know you got thousands of recommendations. You had many books to read, many songs to listen, many movies to watch. Weren't you mad from all of these recommendations? It had to be too much, wasn't it?
It's a long list. I've got to admit.
Never ending.
But what an amazing privilege, and what a brilliant way of understanding the country better. So, for example, when I asked for which films I should watch, I even had someone like Jan Křebejk, the director himself, sending me recommendations
Of his films?
Not of his own films, actually. Funnily, other people told me that I had to see Pelishky and other
yeah.
things, so I did. But that's a privilege. That's not something to be complaining about. I've got to say, I still have a big pile of books and a lot of other things to do, but that's how I do my job better, is by immersing myself here, understanding as much as I can this amazing culture.
Do you still have time to read English, British books, watch British movies, listen British songs?
Yeah, I try to do both. And again, back to your point about representing the UK. So I do still need to be somehow in touch with the UK and reflecting that. But we have a huge advantage in that there's many British films in the cinemas here. There's British bands that come and play, British conductors. You have very strong cultural links between our two countries. And for that reason, it's not too difficult to stay in touch.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but you seem to me like a person who likes communication and meeting new people. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. It's the bit of my job that I really enjoy. I think it'd be quite hard to do my job without being in some way a people person. So there's quite a part of it which is about interacting, getting to know other people. I think the defining quality, in my experience at least, for a good diplomat is curiosity. You have to be interested. You have to be interested in getting to know the place and the people and what's happening and the politics and the business environment. You have to be interested in that. And if you are, and you're curious about getting to know it, then I think you can do the job much better.
Could a diplomat be an introvert?
Yes, I think so. And I would say I am an introvert. And,
Are you?
And that might be a surprise
Really?
from those that see the public
You're
profile.
playing your role great.
But I think it's also about, I think there's a lot of emotional intelligence that's required in a job like this, and self-awareness. And so I do sometimes need downtime. I do sometimes need to step back and have time either just me or with my family especially, to recharge my batteries. And I know that I need that. I know I need to be sort of physically active and to exercise as well if I'm going to do my job well. But a lot of my job is about interacting with other people, and I do enjoy that because I'm interested in them.
Do you have an imposter syndrome?
I think it is very common, actually, including in my own foreign service, to have some sort of sense of imposter syndrome. And I remember joining my ministry 20 years ago, and I had a kind of idea about what a diplomat should look like. And it was probably a very old-fashioned idea. It would have been someone that probably more in place in the 19th century. But it was a real sense that somehow I needed to change to fit in. What I've actually learned is that I can do my job really well by being myself, and by helping other people to be themselves. That's what makes us successful diplomats, and that's what makes for a good ambassador. So there's still sometimes a bit of an imposter syndrome creeps in, but the point is that I don't have to know everything. I've got a brilliant team in the embassy, lots of people, most of them Czech, who know their subjects really well, that can help me to understand what's happening and what we need to do next. And that helps, I think, with the sense of sometimes feeling a bit of an imposter.
For a journalist, it's never-ending job, never-ending work. When you are preparing for interviews, it never ends. Do you have the same feeling before some important meeting or negotiations that you haven't studied as much as you could, or you could study more, or you could prepare more?
Yeah, I think there's many parallels actually between journalism and diplomacy. I think often we're trying to do the same thing, because as a journalist I know you might need to change the subject that you're trying to write about very quickly, and that's often what I have to do. There's a new development or there's a new instruction from London, something that we need to find out about. But I think some of the skills that make us confident as diplomats and journalists, our ability to ask good questions, our ability to be humble about what we do and don't know. So I never pretend to understand something when I don't understand it. But I think if you have that sort of same skill set of good questions, being open, being ready to learn, having a growth mindset, I think those are parallels between diplomacy and journalism that help.
Did you come to some meeting and you said to yourself, oh God, I have no idea what are we talking about? Did it happen to you?
Yeah, I have felt underprepared for things before, definitely. This is a busy job, and sometimes you have to move very quickly between different subjects. But the first thing is to recognise when you don't know as much as you should, to be able to draw on the people who do have that expertise around you, and also to be able to ask good questions and to understand what the broader context is. And this is, I think, sometimes what the senior leadership positions are about. It's not trying to know every single detail, it's trying to understand the bigger picture. And my bigger picture is particularly about UK priorities here in the Czech Republic, and how our two countries can work together for mutual benefit.
Are you a diplomat in everyday life?
So as an ambassador, I always feel that I am the ambassador, so 24 hours a day. And that is an amazing privilege. Sometimes it can be a slightly stressful experience as well, is that feeling of responsibility, that wondering if something is going to go wrong at some point and you'll need to change quickly or respond in order to help the team do what they need to do. So there is definitely that sense of stress sometimes, but also I think you do have to find ways to switch off and to create spaces, whether it's watching the rugby over the weekend or spending some time with friends and talking about nothing to do with work, having connections back in the UK. And then the big one for me is always about spending time with family and making sure that we have a private life and a family life as well as my professional life.
I meant how are you solving the problems or the conflicts? Are you a diplomat where something is happening in the restaurant, in the shop?
So no, I understand.
Do you stay diplomatic?
So I think our sort of stereotype, our image of a diplomat is someone who is constantly sort of compromising and negotiating and polite and coming down. I think the reality of diplomacy is that we're often not like that. So even within the job, it's not always our approach is to find a middle ground or to be negotiating between others. Sometimes our job is to be quite clear where we don't agree. Sometimes it's to be quite tough as well. So the job, I think, has lots of different aspects. My family would probably not say I'm always diplomatic, but I think it's good to have some space where you can be less diplomatic so that you can relax properly.
I wanted to ask if you are diplomat as a father.
Well, there's some skills, although I think the skills actually probably transfer the other way better, which is that being a father has helped me be a better diplomat. So trying to understand, particularly young people today, I have 2 kids, one a teenager, one nearly a teenager, and I learn an awful lot from them, as much as develop those skills that parenting can teach you to help you be a bit more empathetic with others.
I know your Czech language and Czech skills are frequent topics in the interviews, but I'm interested, if you had this power, would it be easier for the whole world to speak only one language?
There is a certain level in which, it absolutely makes sense that if we had fewer obstacles, if we had fewer barriers between us, that there might be less misunderstanding. But actually, I think a lot of the misunderstanding doesn't come down to language. I think it comes down to not being curious about the other person, not wanting to understand things from their perspective. And then language just becomes an additional obstacle on the way. And you would lose, of course, all of that amazing richness. So the ability not just to communicate, but also to start to understand a foreign language is a huge insight into that culture, into the way that people think differently. And again, it's one of my favorite parts of the job. It's not always easy. Definitely in the case of Czech, it's not been easy. I still have a long way to go. But I feel lucky to have it, and I feel that I'm a better diplomat for making that effort.
If you had this chance, you wouldn't say that only Esperanto or some one language for whole world would be great idea.
I don't think that's how it would work in practice. I think it would be, unfortunately, we would lose some of that quality underneath. And of course, as a British diplomat, we have a huge advantage, which is so much of the world does use English as a common language. In fact, there are far more people who speak English as a second language than who speak it as a first language. In many ways, we've kind of lost any sense of control over that. And English as a medium doesn't belong only to the British people or to the native speakers, it belongs to everyone. So, that's a great privilege for us, but that shouldn't make us lazy about making the effort to learn languages or to understand other people as well.
Which language was more difficult to learn, Japanese or Czech? Favorite question.
Czech has felt more difficult, to be honest, than Japanese. And that might be partly because I'm just 20 years older. And so I've slowed down in the way that I can absorb things. Although I've become probably better at learning languages because I know how to do it a bit better now. Czech's been pretty tough. That said, at least I don't have to learn a whole new system of writing. So for that reason, probably Japanese is still just edging it. But at the moment, I feel as though Czech has been quite a few headaches. But I'm determined, and I'm going to continue.
I've mentioned in the beginning that you've studied religious studies, theology. Isn't it the Czech Republic a little bit boring for you?
So I've certainly not been bored so far. So in my first year, and of course, this is a country that has, statistically one of the lowest levels of religious attendance, one of the highest levels of atheism. But it also has an amazing religious history. Jan Hus is one of the most significant figures in European religious history. And so it's not been boring for me. It's a subject that I still find really interesting. It's maybe more obvious in some of the other places that I worked before. So in Bosnia, where you had these very strong different religious traditions, you had European Islam, you had Jewish heritage, you had Catholic, and you had Orthodox as well. It was more on the surface, those religious differences. But actually the same sort of underlying questions about philosophy and culture and history and language, those things apply just as much here.
So is it interesting for you to study or to explore why are we, not a very religious country? Why are we so atheistic?
I think it's a really interesting question, and I'm not sure I understand yet. And I've had, some interesting conversations with people here, and there are religious people in this country as well, and religious traditions. But at the same time, the Czech Republic does look a bit different from the others around. And what I like throughout that history, and something that's very appealing to me personally, and probably as a Brit as well, is that there's a slight sort of suspicion of authority here, which I think we share as well, and institutions, and maybe that's linked in some way to this kind of tradition.
I know you travel a lot around the whole republic. You visited all the regions. Do you see the Czech Republic as a divided country?
So it's been important to me, as you say, to get to all 14 regions in my first year. I was very determined to do that. But that's just the start of a program of systematically getting outside of Prague. I'm not the ambassador to Prague. I'm the ambassador to the whole country, and you have to make that effort because otherwise it's very easy to get stuck in a bubble in a capital city. As I've travelled around, I've felt a huge sense of the diversity. So very different parts of the country in terms of culture, in terms of the industry, in terms of, say, the economic transition that some parts of the country are going through, some of the significant challenges that parts of the country are facing as well. I wouldn't say that it's felt divided particularly, it's felt more diverse and different, but it also, things look quite different from outside of Prague as you look back towards Prague. And I think that is something that has just reinforced the need to get outside of the capital city as well.
The UK used to be a great empire in the many centuries. Is it still this feeling in the mentality, in the UK mentality?
So I think you can certainly be a great country without an empire. What I love about the UK today is that it feels the history of that relationship with many parts of the world, in South Asia, in the Pacific, in Africa as well. You feel that history within the UK, and if you travel around London especially, it's a global city. That's not because of an empire that's still in place today, it's because of an openness and an exchange that continues. So that's something I think that's still great about Great Britain. I think the UK has had to evolve. It's undergone an enormous amount of change over the last couple of generations in particular. But I like that. I like the fact that we have a Prime Minister who is of Indian descent, who is a practicing Hindu, that we have people of different ethnic and religious and cultural backgrounds leading our country. I think we're richer because of that.
Could you see this openness different in the Czech Republic? Is it different?
So, I mean, clearly it's a different sort of history and context because we don't have that same sort of relationship with empire or with particular areas. But what you do have here is a really interesting kind of combination of historical factors. And you look at something like clearly the number of Slovaks that are here and that very close relationship that exists between your two countries. I'm fascinated by the Vietnamese presence here in the Czech Republic as well, and that's really interesting for me to see and to understand, and that relationship, which obviously goes back to a particular political context, but that makes the country even richer today. So I see a lot of that. It's different because the history is different, but I still see an openness here, which is really positive.
Were you a good student when you were young?
I mean, the more I look back, and having kids makes you reflect on this, the more I look back, the more I wonder about my work ethic was not always the best. I've recently launched a program of trying to attract some young people to work with me as youth advisors, like to put together a small group. And I've been reading their applications, a huge number of applications, enormously impressive. No apathy, some frustration sometimes, but generally a lot of people, young people across the country who are working really hard to make a difference, not just in their studies, but also in their communities and in other areas. I don't think I was such a good example when I was 18, and I've been really impressed by what young people in this country are doing.
Would you give some advice to your 18-year-old self?
Yeah, so I think it would be, 18-year-old me would be amazed to see where I am today. I mean, not just because of the physical building, but the sort of journey that I've been on, that I found a way to build on this love of spending time in other countries, that I've been able to build a career, an amazing opportunity to experience different places, to learn languages, to meet people. And I think 18-year-old me would be really reassured that things are going to work out okay. So I think this is also the more contact that I have with young people as well, I understand that nervousness, particularly in a world in which we're all facing multiple challenges. We've lived through the pandemic. We're dealing with a huge security challenge here in Europe, Russian aggression against Ukraine, many challenges around the world. Will we be able to take the action we need to on climate change? There's plenty of reasons to be nervous, but the more contact I have, especially with young people, the more optimistic I feel.
What did shape you or inspire you when you were young and child?
So I think, I was lucky enough to have an amazing family, parents who supported, especially my sort of curiosity, who allowed me to follow the things that I was interested in. That took me in some quite strange directions, studying religious studies or moving to Japan and living there for a while. But that unconditional support then allowed me to explore and develop and build an amazing career and series of jobs that I've been able to do. And that sort of led to me here today. So I think I've been very lucky in that sort of family support. I think early in my career I met some really amazing and inspiring leaders that I work with. So male and female diplomats, ambassadors that I worked with who set a great example and that I've been able to learn a lot from and try to sort of emulate. And with that comes the confidence of knowing that I could do this job whilst still being myself. And I think that's a really reassuring message for all of us.
Your Excellency, thank you for the interview. Thanks for we could be here, and thank you for invitation, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thanks for a great chat.
Thank you.
Jsme mezinárodní investiční skupina Progressus.